Boo.
Well, we're going to pass it back off to you for your third and final story, right?
Yes.
I'm going to get the music going.
This final story is a little bit more serious, a little bit less lighthearted. So I want to remove the hat because if this is true, which I believe it 100% is, this is not something to joke about. And so I feel weird wearing it. The story is titled The Man at the Door. I was 9 or 10 years old, living outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and it was particularly cold weather that year. I can't remember why my mother and older brother weren't home at the time, but my father, a barber in the city, was upstairs getting ready for work. I had just set up a new dartboard I had gotten as an early Christmas present from a distant family at Thanksgiving dinner, when I heard a car door slam and tires burn out quite loudly. Running to the door to peek outside, my vision of the intersection is blocked by a tree. My father, hearing my footsteps in a hurry, yells down, "It's just that kid down the street. He's about to buy new tires, so he's burning the ones out he's got." I go back to throwing darts, and just a few moments later, as my 10-year-old brain is reasoning the logic my father had just said, I think to myself, why did he slam the car door? As I'm holding on to the stop, I hear the sound of glass clinking together. It gets louder, has a beat to it, like if you took a bag of marbles and hit them like a drum. If I can only explain it as intuition, this seemingly harmless sound absolutely terrified me in this moment. One last pause, and then it meets me on the other side of the door. I'm paralyzed with fear as a man begins pounding on the door. I'm only feet away and at an angle I can't see out clearly. I screamed at the top of my lungs for my father. I hear him racing down the stairs as my ridiculous self is on autopilot, going to open the front door for some reason. My father lands directly behind me, having jumped down the last staircase due to my gut-wrenching scream. The door was wide open now, revealing a young black man, completely naked, beaten, bloodied, and taped at the mouth, and tied with Christmas tree lights. Tied head to toe in glass Christmas tree lights. He falls into our doorway. My father slammed the door and locked it. My fear is completely gone. This man is crying, talking through the tape, tied in a fetal position on our floor. I reach down to take the tape off. As I do, my father grabs me and launches me up the staircases, yelling, "Call 911 now." I sprint upstairs and dial 911. I'm sounding off every detail and fact I can think they need to know as I'm heading back downstairs. My father has thrown an old Navy pea coat over the man and is gingerly removing the duct tape from his mouth. I'll never forget the look in that man's eyes, welled with tears, breathing heavily, as he finally calms himself for the first time in a long time. As the tape comes off, he busts out into a full-fledged howling cry. The kind of cry you cry from your stomach, from your soul. My dad looks away. He cried like that, still tied up in that pea coat over him, until the cops got there 10 minutes later. Even they couldn't get him untied. He must have had 100 feet of vintage Christmas tree lights tying his hands together, and then to his waist, down to his feet, and back up again. I overheard an officer saying to another that he must have been tied like that for a while, as a smaller cord had embedded in his skin. As an officer talked to my father, pointed at me, and told me to get in the house. They walked up onto our porch, just enough for me to hear their conversation behind the door. The man, who was 32 years old, had pulled over the side of the road to help a stranded motorist. Someone who he thought was alone, but had an accomplice hiding nearby. When this good Samaritan offered his help in changing the flat tire, he was knocked over the head and put into the trunk of the car. The two men took him to an abandoned building and first tied him up with rope, and then repeatedly beat and assaulted him for 3 days, until he escaped, only to be captured on the road, and this time tied up with the lights. This went on for weeks, apparently. How long? I'm still not sure, as we had never got the man's name. I never saw anything in the news. My dad called the police station a few days later, but no one would ever tell him a thing. I remember the tire marks in our intersection stayed there for what seemed like years. I'm 31 years old now, and every single year around Thanksgiving, I think about that man and how strange it was that I was so terrified of the sound of glass clinking together.
That's terrible. Traumatizing for multiple people.
It didn't occur to me to bring this up in your story earlier that this was my story tonight at the end was going to involve someone helping someone off the side of the road and a second assailant being waiting.
Yeah, the chat's already identifying how we somehow
did it again.
Yeah. It's really not planned, folks. It's weird.
Never ask each other really what
There's no talk about much about, really before the episode. Not related to this, at least. Not related to the show, at least.
Yeah.
So it's really weird how it happens. But yeah, I could see why you took it down a notch and on the serious factor. What a horrendous crime.
Absolutely horrible and terrifying, and you put yourself in the kid's position.
Yeah, you can see it, yeah.
Hearing that noise and hearing the hammering on the door, and then seeing that would just shatter your worldview entirely.
I think people do a great job of, when they say like glass clanging together, they do a good job about giving an example, and the marbles is a pretty good example.
Yeah,
because I was trying to think of like, what is that? What do you like? What is? Then I thought about it after you said the marbles, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I read that story, and I was like, I was sick to my stomach. I'm sick now to my stomach when I read it just now because it's such a horrible, horrible story.
That might ruin Thanksgiving for you.
If you think about this poor man that this happened to, in the way they described him crying out, there's such a horrible situation, utterly terrifying. And it goes to show you, as we said, you can't be 100% certain what's going to happen when you help someone in the middle of the road somewhere or anything like this. Like, you have to be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had the same question. Did he survive, Luke?
He did survive, yes, but
because that's how they found all the additional information.
Yeah, so he survived, but they never really found out what happened as far as like capturing
who did it.
Yeah, and as far as I know, it never got solved. You think he should have been more aware, but you can't always be aware. You always say you should try to be aware, but you can't always be aware that you might be attacked at any given point. And it's just horrifying. It's a nightmare scenario. People are monsters. There are monsters out there. And this was the most horrifying story I could find tonight.
They didn't want something besides the fact of torturing that person.
This was purely done out of malice and evil intent. There was nothing beyond just being horrible.
Hard to think of a bright side, but at least he survived. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Living is preferable in every circumstance, in my opinion. It's just because life is possibility. You never know what's going to happen. I would love to hear, what happened with this young man. It's just such a nightmare scenario. There's sometimes something you just can't get over. And so who knows? But you can see how this kid would be forever changed. He said he's 31 years old now. And he would be about the age of the man that showed up that day. And to think about that at Thanksgiving time, I can imagine this is probably not his favorite holiday. And you think about that sound. I personally would not be able to put up Christmas lights or anything like that just so I could avoid that sound for the rest of my life.
Definitely makes you feel thankful, though, for what you have.
And I feel thankful that they were able to save, to get him inside the house, protect him, get the cops there, and see to him while they were waiting on the cops.
3 days. He was captive 3 days?
He was kept there for 3 days originally, and then he got away. Recaptured
for how long after that?
A week.
That's crazy. That would be the worst. Time would just stand still, it'd be terrible. Well, you can put that damn hat back on, man, because this is bringing me down.
The story is over now. I can put it back.
Wonder what the motivations were,
Just being a monster.
Yeah.
So many of our stories have involved pure evil.
Jeff Townsend Media. CG, good night.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back?
Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?